another advantage to leading songs fast is that we get more time in Job, so I appreciate that. But I'm biased since I'm leading class. So tonight, if you would, open up your Bibles to Job chapter 4. If you recall from last week, we're taking a short deviation from our lesson books so that we can more deeply explore some of the middle chapters in the book of Job. And last week, we explored Job chapter 3, where we heard Job finally give voice to some of the pain and the suffering that he was enduring. And so chapter 3 is really a lament that Job voices after a week of silence, where he curses his birth, he rues the day he was born, he ends up thinking about how it might have been better if he had never been born at all. And so Job's going through some really tough emotions. He's struggling, and he's trying to express the depths of the sorrow that he's feeling. In Job chapter 4, though, we see one of Job's friends who had been sitting there with him for a week. One of his friends finally speaks up. And so I'd like to start out by reading Job chapter 4, verses 1 to 6. Job chapter 4, verses 1 to 6, it says, "Then Eliphaz the Temanite responded, 'If one ventures a word with you, will you become impatient? But who can refrain from speaking? Behold, you have taught many, and you have strengthened weak hands. Your words have helped the stumbling to stand, and have strengthened feeble knees. But now it comes to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are horrified. Is your fear of God not your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope?'" So first off, the first thing I'd like to note here is a little bit more about Eliphaz. We can actually discern just a little bit more from another Bible verse here. It says that Eliphaz is a Temanite. He comes from Teman. And that's actually a place that's mentioned elsewhere in the Bible. If you flip over to the book of Jeremiah, in Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 7 mentions this city. Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 7, it says, "Concerning Edom, what is the Lord? This is what the Lord of armies says. Is there no longer any wisdom in Teman? Has good advice been lost by the prudent? Has their wisdom decayed?" In Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 7, God is mentioning the city of Teman because it is known for its wisdom. It's got this reputation of having wisdom. And so in the context here, he's saying, is there no more wisdom left in this city that's renowned for wisdom? And so in context of Eliphaz, he's coming from a place that's well renowned for its wisdom. And that's important because as Eliphaz is giving advice to Job, it's coming from what we could say is a very wise place in the ancient world. It's coming from someone who lived in a place that's known for its wisdom. So the things that Eliphaz says to Job help to represent the best of the wisdom of the ancient world. Now back over to Job chapter 4. Eliphaz starts out in verses 1 to 6, and he addresses Job. And who can kind of sum up verses 1 to 6? What does he start out by telling to Job? Somebody sum that up for me. Go ahead, Addie.
Telling Job you were able to help other people. You were always uplifting them, helping them in every way they need, and all at once.
Yeah.
It's come out on you, and you are not handling it well.
Yeah, that's a really good summary. He says that, Job's helped a lot of people in the past, to endure troubles, trials, things like that. But now Job's in that position, and he's not doing so well with it. And the implication is that he should know exactly what to do because he's told what to do to other people, how to get through it, right? So why is he having so much trouble with this? Anybody else have any thoughts about what he's telling Job here? I think another good thing to note is how he opens up, how he first approaches this with Job. Notice he says, if one ventures a word with you, will you become impatient? He's a little bit delicate in the way that he starts to address his friend. He says that he feels compelled to speak. He says, who can refrain from speaking? He feels like he needs to talk to Job after Job has voiced this lament. But he wants to make sure that, you're not going to get mad if I say something, right? Like, it's okay. I feel like I need to say something, though. So don't get mad at me, but I feel like I need to talk to you. That's kind of the gist of what he's saying there. And then, of course, like I said, like Addie mentioned, he says that Job has taught many. He's strengthened weak hands. His words help the stumbling to stand, have strengthened feeble knees. So Job, we see some more good things that Job has done as a righteous man, right? We read about Job's reputation in the earlier chapters, and here we see that reinforced. Job has been doing good things. But yeah, in verse 5, Eliphaz says, but now it comes to you, and you're impatient. I think maybe that translation doesn't quite do it justice of what Job's suffering with, right? But he says it touches you, and you are horrified. In verse 6, he says, is your fear of God not your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Someone explain what verse 6 means. What's Eliphaz saying? What does he mean when he says, is the fear of God not your confidence? How is the fear of God anybody's confidence? How could that be confidence for somebody? Matt?
Is he kind of saying the fear of the Lord is like following the Lord, and aren't you confident that if you will do right, then the Lord will bless you? That seems to be the concept, the big picture concept that he's going after.
Right, yeah. I think when you take into account the rest of the speech that Eliphaz is going to give here that we're going to go over, I think that's exactly what he's going for, is that, we know that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, right? And he's saying, don't you have confidence in that? That should be your confidence. And then he says, and the integrity of your ways is your hope, right? The integrity of your ways, doing good in all that you do, isn't that your hope? Essentially, what Matt said, that if you're doing good, if you're respecting God and you're doing good, shouldn't you be well off, right? And we're going to see that that's essentially the core of Eliphaz's whole speech to Job. If you were to distill it down, you could say that the innocent don't suffer, right? This is the assumption that that Eliphaz is kind of stating here, is that good people get blessed and wicked people get punished. That's simplifying it, but that's essentially what he's going for. Rick?
Right. And he's with that question, he's really reminding him of what his confidence should be in, reminding him of that, so that, you're right, the rest of it we know it kind of comes down to you must have done something to deserve this, but
right
here he's saying is your confidence not in God and in acting correctly towards him? Is that not what your faith is in?
And you raise a good point. Like, why is Eliphaz stating this stuff? We know he's a good friend. He just came and sat in silence to support Job for a solid week. I don't know how far Eliphaz lived away, but there was some element of travel to get there. And then he stays with him a week in silence to support him. So he cares for Job, and he cares about him a lot. And so in saying this, it's not driven by this place of maliciousness. He's not doing this so that he can point fingers at Job and make Job feel worse. You can kind of get the feel as we go through this that he wants his friend to be in a better place. And he thinks, based on what he knows, that means that Job needs to repent of something. So he's trying to, in a way, chastise his brother, for his betterment. Maybe he won't enjoy that right now, but he's trying to make his brother feel better by correcting him, by encouraging him to repentance. And so he's reminding him of these things, of his confidence, of his hope, where he can get these things from. Matt, and then Pat.
Okay. It's kind of like this Eliphaz, as you said, is a wise person. If you take all of the wisdom from Proverbs, sort of those rules of thumb, we might say, those Proverbs, if you treat people well, then you'll be well off, and or train up a child in the way you should go, and when he's old, he won't depart from it. But we in real life, that's not always precisely exactly what happens.
Right.
Because maybe we do raise a child and they go off to be like this crazy person and disavows God and everything, or maybe we do an honest living, but someone comes and kills us. Things happen.
Right.
And I think those are all true things in Proverbs. That's not worthless just because there's exceptions. But I think the problem is Eliphaz is stuck on the concepts of Proverbs. There are no exceptions. I know how it is. You are wrong, Job, because if you do well, nothing bad will happen.
Yeah, exactly.
To the extreme.
Pat, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, a lot of times we look at life and say, look at all that I have. Look at all that I did to get that. And we forget that these are blessings from God, and we wouldn't have those things if God had not given us the strength and the body to do them, and the intellect to have them. And I often think of the doctors that took care of me and removed that blood clot from my brain, that God gave that, the intelligence, and I'm thankful that God did for all the doctors.
Yeah.
Because without that, they could not have done it.
Rick.
Yeah, to Matt's point, you might remember when the Lord was talking to, I forget who he was talking to exactly, disciples and whoever was around him at the time, but he was talking about the tower that fell on those people. And he said, like, some of them sinned more than the others. And his implication is that bad things can still happen in this world, because this world's corrupt.
I mean, look at Jesus, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus is flawless, perfect, and he was executed as a criminal. So while, yes, the Proverbs have wisdom for us, they're not hard and fast rules that have no exceptions, right? And so that's one of the things, as you explore the books of wisdom in the Bible, they explore all these things very deeply on how justice works, how God executes justice, and things like that. And I do want to drop down 2 verses because this really ties into what Matt said. So verses 7 and 8, it says, "Remember now, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the upright destroyed? According to what I have seen, those who plow wrongdoing and those who sow trouble harvest it." Notice what Eliphaz says, according to what I have seen. So Eliphaz is basing a lot of this stuff on personal life experience. He's seen these things happen. People who do bad things, they reap what they sow. So these are things that he's witnessed. And as Matt said, he kind of gets stuck, though, in this viewpoint. Now, this is something that I think that we can really learn from, because all of us, I think, have done something similar to this at one point or another, where we've read the Bible, right? And maybe we fixate on a couple verses that we've read. Maybe they're fresh in our minds from our Bible study or something. And we don't think about the other scenarios outside of that, right? For example, maybe you have something that happens that's bad to you, and you feel like you didn't deserve it. Oh man, like I got hit with this unexpected bill. Well, why'd that happen? I didn't do anything wrong, and so maybe you start to think, is this a punishment? Do I have some sin in my life that I need to get rid of? If you start to go through a hard time, questions like that can pop up in your brain, and you start to wonder, maybe I need to start examining myself and see if I'm doing something and I'm being chastised for it. And again, we know that the Lord does chastise those who serve him because he cares about them, right? So when you're trying to balance out the wisdom of the Bible, it's easy to focus on parts of it and not the whole. And that's kind of what Eliphaz is doing here. And we've all done similar things before. So it's a really good reminder for us as we see Eliphaz doing this, right? Any other thoughts or comments or questions there before we move on? Yes, Rick.
We have to look at it from the big picture, from the real spiritual picture.
Yeah.
Especially when he's talking about I think in the next verse he talks about they perish, they're destroyed. We have to look at that from the spiritual aspect, from the big picture of what really matters is destroyed. When your soul is destroyed, that's what matters.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments? All right, let's read down to verse 11 now. So starting in verse 9, it says, "By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they come to an end. The roaring of the lion, and the voice of the fierce lion, and the teeth of the young lions are broken out. The lion perishes for lack of prey, and the cubs of the lioness are scattered." All right, Eliphaz seems really focused on lions here for some reason. So who can make sense of those verses to me? What's he getting at? He's using these lions as an example, but put it in other words, what's he trying to go after here? Matt.
Maybe the sovereignty of God, the fact that God is powerful over everything, and God knows if you have done wrong, and he will bring retribution upon you. And since you're suffering, Job, the implication is that he has done wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone else have a different thought on what that means? We're all good. We all agree the same. That's great. No, that's totally fine. So now, if we read down, let's go from verse 12, and we'll go down to verse 17. We'll stop at verse 17 for a moment. So 12 to 17, Eliphaz continues, and he says, "Now a word was brought to me secretly, and my ear received a whisper of it. Amid disquieting thoughts from visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on people, dread came upon me, and trembling, and made all my bones shake. Then a spirit passed by my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. Something was standing still, but I could not recognize its appearance. A form was before my eyes. There was silence. Then I heard a voice. Can mankind be righteous before God? Can a man be pure before his maker?" So Eliphaz describes this situation here. And then it's almost like he sees this, he says he sees this spirit kind of like in either his dream or because he says visions of the night. And then he has a question come from this spirit. So before we talk about the question, what do you think is going on here? Do you think that this was like an angelic messenger to him? Do you think this was a vision through a dream? Is he just being poetic here? Right? We know that this is a lot of dense Hebrew poetry that's happening as well. And sometimes they use flowery language to try and convey their thoughts here. So what is he saying about this whisper in the night? What's he mean by that? Matt?
I'm not completely sure, but it kind of reminds me of people you hear about today, blatantly false teachers, when you compare what they teach to the inspired word of God. And they'll say, I had a vision and this and that, and God spoke to me, and then send me money is usually what they'll say. And I, obviously in the Bible those things do happen, but this fella in the big picture, he's said to be wrong at the end. Job is indicated in the big picture of his book, so this guy's wrong in his accusations. We know that, so maybe he's wrong in what he's saying. Maybe he's making that up, or it's his imagination or something.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if he's trying to just say, I had this troubling dream, and this is what I heard in the dream. I don't know if he doesn't seem like a dishonest person from the context. So I'm not really sure what exactly he's getting after here by telling this story about the spirit. I just know that what really matters from this little anecdote that he's telling is the question. And we'll talk about that in a second, but I just wanted to make sure and see if there was any other comment. From the way that I've always read this, I just kind of assume that he's talking about a dream that he had, and this is how he's conveying what happened in this dream. It'd be like me saying, oh, I had a troubling dream last night, and in the dream there was a ghost, and it said this to me, and then we talk about what it said. So I don't know exactly what he's going for, but any other thoughts on what might be happening here?
Could it be a form of a parable even? I'm not sure either. It just
It's
seems like
yeah.
that kind of a thing.
It does seem like that. So I don't know exactly what he's going for.
Even if it's the dream, like you said, it comes off as, like Daniel had a dream and Joseph had a dream. And there were revelations from the Lord, and that's kind of how it comes off.
Yeah.
And I think he's wrong in that.
Yeah.
He's wrong.
But he asks an interesting question, right? So he says that this voice whispers two questions really to him. In verse 17, can a man be righteous before God? Can a man be pure before his maker? Now, what do you think about those questions? What do you think the answer to that is? Can a man be pure before God? Rick?
I think this is almost like hearkening to John, who says we all have sinned. That, in a way, the question is supposed to make you think, am I really just, or is God just graceful and mercy to me?
Yeah.
Am I really pure, or is he just loving me anyway?
Yeah.
That type of thing. That's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I felt exactly the same. I think that is the message that Eliphaz is going for here is all have sinned, right? So how can anybody in mankind be righteous before God if everyone's sinned? Like, nobody's perfect, right? And we all know that the Messiah hadn't come at this point in time, so it's a pretty good statement there. And he kind of just expands on that and says, can a man be pure before his maker? Kind of the essence is, Job, you're not perfect. You have to have sin. So you have some sin, and this is what you're being punished for. Fess up. Let's just admit that and move on, Matt.
And certainly not denying that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But going back to this text, in chapter 1 and verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. So God's pretty pleased with Job.
He is pleased.
That's God's assessment of this.
Yeah. He is pretty pleased. Kim?
It makes me think of going back to Satan, and he was creating this situation to test Job, and same thing happened with Jesus to test the Lord. I just lost my train of thought. I just derailed.
That's okay. When it comes back to you, just raise your hand again. We'll get it. Matt, going back to what you said, though. So we know God has given his assessment of Job in the beginning, right? So that we can keep this in mind while these conversations are happening. We know that God thinks very well of Job. He says he's blameless, right? So taking into account what Paul says, that all have sinned, how can one be blameless?
Well, through the blood of Christ, that would be our answer, but
right?
from the perspective of Job, that may be a little harder to answer.
Right. Well, I mean, Christ died for all mankind once and for all, right? So it kind of has echoes back.
And he talked about how he was even doing sacrifices for his children, and
right.
He was keeping the law to whatever extent he had it.
So blameless is just no blame is being held on your account. It doesn't mean that you've never committed a wrongdoing, right? That's the way that it works for us. We can be found blameless in God's sight because Jesus took on that punishment in our place. So there is a price to pay for our wrongdoings, but Jesus paid it, right? So that no blame is held to us. Therefore, we are blameless, right? Meaning that no blame is being held to us. Even though we have done wrong, we have sinned. Jim?
When I think of this situation, I always remember what the Hebrew writer wrote in Hebrews chapter 11 about faith. And this is what it's getting down to here with Job, which is the had in his attitude toward God and trying to do what God said.
Yeah.
And that verse says, without faith it's impossible to please him. For he who draws near to God must believe that he exists. And Job did believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's evident from his action. And then it says, must believe that he exists and he rewards those who seek him.
Yeah.
What was Job doing? He
Well,
was trying.
It's like how faith was accounted as righteousness to Abraham, right? Same kind of thing. Now, one thing that we've all remarked so far is that Eliphaz is making some assumptions, right? He's got some things wrong. But I do want to point out that while Eliphaz is getting some things wrong, not everything he's saying is wrong, right? Look over at 1 Corinthians chapter 3 in verse 19. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 19. And it says, "For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in the sight of God, for it is written, He is the one who catches the wise by their craftiness." That is Paul quoting Job chapter 5, verse 13, which is, we're not in chapter 5 yet, but one of the things that Eliphaz says. Eliphaz isn't 100% off base. He is saying things that are right, but he's misapplying a lot of it because of his assumptions. Essentially, Eliphaz believes in God and God's justice. Eliphaz knows that God is a just person, and he's not wrong about that. Eliphaz's whole mistake is coming from the fact that he assumes that he understands how that justice is applied, right? And his assumption is if you're innocent, you shouldn't be suffering. Wicked suffer, right? Because they do bad things and they get punished. But the innocent are blessed, right? This is kind of the assumption that he's sticking to. And that's an assumption about how God hands out justice. And luckily, Job chapter 1 explained to us, it showed us that heavenly scene so that we can understand what's going on a little bit. We see how Satan was instigating this entire thing to try and prove a point or something. And we see that, God is permitting these things to happen, but it doesn't seem to be because he's upset with Job or punishing him. He praises him for how he's behaving. And it's almost like he's proving the point back to Satan that you're wrong, right? So I just wanted to point out that don't be too hard on Eliphaz, right? Eliphaz has some things right. He's got some underlying assumptions. And that's really one of the key points for us to take away from the things that Eliphaz are saying, because we do similar things. This is where studying the Bible is so important, because it's easy for us to misapply what we read, right? Eliphaz has wisdom, but he is misusing that wisdom and getting the wrong impression about things. He's well-intentioned. He's a good guy. He wants to help his friend, but he's getting things wrong, right? So that's why it's important to us to rightly divide the word of truth. Rick.
To your point, yeah, he doesn't know everything that's going on, right? He
He doesn't.
there when Satan came to talk to God, so
Yeah.
he
And
doesn't know
really,
anything about that conversation.
and that's part of God's point later, is that Job and none of his friends really have a wide enough perspective to understand what's happening here, right? He stresses that later on in the book, and we'll get to that.
I like another verse that you were reading in 1 Corinthians. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And Eliphaz is a wise person in his time, right? I don't think anyone would deny that, but he's wrong, right?
Words could be futile.
Yeah. Matt?
We could say that Eliphaz graduated from the school of Proverbs. He didn't go on to the college of Ecclesiastes and Job.
Yeah.
Get those finer tuned ideas that we're hopefully learning as we study this.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So Proverbs isn't wrong, but it's not everything.
Right. Yeah, and one of the great things about looking at the books as a whole is you can kind of see how they each explore a different part of God, God's character, his justice, and how he applies that justice, right? I know Ecclesiastes can be a depressing book, and it seemingly talks about how nothing matters. Everything is vain, everything is vanity, right? That's what it seems to be saying. But when you get to the end of the book, you see how everything does matter under the context of obeying God. All of a sudden, things that wouldn't matter in life do matter because you can do God's will through it. You can turn others to Christ by doing good deeds or by doing good work or things like that. You can steer people to God versus just going out and working for however many years and then dying, and then that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, right? So all these books kind of build off one another as they hash out some of these deeper spiritual ideas. Any other questions, comments? I think we'll probably stop right there towards the end of the chapter, and we'll finish chapter 4 next week. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate the participation and look forward to next week.
These things here in Job, just as an aside, these things always bothered me when I was young. It's like thinking that bad things happen to good people. That just always really bothered me a lot. So it's good to discuss it with other people who, can understand that and know that it's a part of life. We may not like it, but it's a part of this life anyway. But this evening, I want to look at Isaiah chapter 55. Now, in my Bible that I was looking at, this was given the heading, God's Invitation to an Abundant Life. And I just thought that was an appropriate invitation. So I want to look at the first 2 verses of Isaiah chapter 55. And then we'll look at some others further down. But Isaiah 55, verse 1 and 2. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Yes, come, buy wine and milk, without money and without price. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, and your wages for what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good, and let your soul delight itself in abundance. And this is the grace and mercy of God that he offers to satisfy us for free. He offers real sustenance for our souls. He offers what really matters. He's offering everything we really need in this life. Not the empty promises of the world, all the material things that will turn to dust or burn up. Nothing here is eternal, except for us, if we follow the Lord, right? If we look a few verses down in verses 6 and 7, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. In verse 7, the use of the word for mercy, where he says, and he will have mercy on him, it indicates compassion and love for us. And out of that love, he will forgive us for our abundant sins, right? Our abundant issues, our abundant problems. He will love us and help us with those. But he blesses us beyond just forgiveness. He blesses us in this life, again, just a few verses down. If you look at verses 10 through 13, for as the rain comes down and the snow from heaven, and do not return there, but water the earth, and make it bring forth and bud, that it may give seed to the sower, and bread to the eater. So shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish what I please, and it shall prosper in the thing for which I sent it. For you shall go out with joy, and be led out with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth into singing before you. and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress tree, and instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle tree. And it shall be to the Lord for a name, for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. God gives us the peace of mind to be able to see the beauty of this world. By having our faith in Him, we can enjoy the wonder of what He's created for us to enjoy here. And so I just wanted to mention that. It kind of a little bit goes along with what we're talking about if we have that belief and trust and confidence in God. So if you would need anything this evening, I would encourage you to follow God's invitation in verse 6. Seek the Lord while He may be found. Call upon Him while He is near. So if you have any need this evening, please come forward while we stand and sing.